Hi, I'm Mark Cleghorn for the Photographer Academy, and today we're talking the fundamental basics of speedlight photography and how you can kind of really make it a part of your everyday photography, whether you're a hobbyist or a pro. For the past 35 years, I've been using flash not only in studio but on location, and the technology has drastically changed itself. Speedlight, kind of this portable flash, originally designed to go onto the hot shoe on top of the camera, basically has kind of morphed itself into a very, very intelligent kind of partner in the world of creative photography for us. And we need to actually kind of harness its technology to ensure that we're going to get great images from the moment we take it out of the box. There's some terminology that we need to kind of explain first, because you're going to be hearing it quite a lot. The first things first is the term speedlight. It can be called strobe as well. It's basically a flash. It's xenon gas that basically explodes when it's told to fire. That gives us the kind of the flash of light, as it were. And the amount of flash of light from the little speedlight itself is being controlled by us or by the camera to a certain exposure to give us the great photograph. So speedlight is always going to refer to the portable flash, no matter what, if it's a manufacturer's own brand, like we're seeing here with a Canon, or we're seeing a third-party brand, like the Yongnuo here, which is basically in the same kind of way. We've got other kind of flashes around the place. Another third party is a Cactus. There's lots of different ones out there. I'm not recommending any of them. It's really down to you to do your bit of homework, but basically make it affordable, especially when you're getting going. Probably the next biggest terminology to understand is when we're wanting to use some kind of connection to make the flash more intelligent, especially when we start to talk about flash-to-flash communication or controller to communication. This is what I'm on about, the master and the slave, yes? So the master is basically on top of the camera hot shoe. Remember, the camera hot shoe is basically the intelligent part that is going to tell the flash to fire. On the bottom of a speedlight is basically there's these intelligent pins that will basically communicate with the camera and then allow it to actually do its full kind of automatic job. But in the nuts and bolts of it, it's going to tell the flash to fire. If we're using the master and the slave, okay, or the commander and the slave, we first of all need to make sure that the flashes are similar and they are basically in the same kind of communication. What do I mean by that? Well, there's basically the old style of communication, which is infrared. And this sends an infrared pulse, and basically if there was another similar brand and similar make that could communicate together, this flash, if it was on top of the hot shoe, could tell another flash that is similar to fire. But the infrared problem is that you can't really shoot around corners or hide it around corners. And that is where wireless kind of pretty much became the industry kind of leading creativity kind of for portable flash. Initially, they wasn't built into the Speedlight, but as today, Canon, Nikon, pretty much all the flash manufacturers have some form of wireless communication. So now we can hide this around a corner, we can put it at a greater distance as well. But what we're talking about as far as infrared and wireless kind of communication, it is just that, a communication. So learn to actually what your flash does. If you have the option and you've got the budget to spend into the wireless, I would definitely start off there to begin with, because the only way is up and things ready. Okay, so another little thing is going to be the exposure. We're going to be talking about TTL, manual, strobosonic. We're going to be talking about second curtain sync and high-speed sync. Okay, so let's talk about those first, all right? If we kind of just come across onto the Speedlight itself for a minute and we just switch it on. Now, all the different kind of Speedlights will switch on and off in a slightly different way, but similar, okay? Some you'll have to press and hold, some you'll just kind of flick a switch like I'm doing here. So once I switch it on, we can see now that we've basically got the ETTL kind of showing in the top left-hand side. Now that is an automatic exposure. It's evaluative through the lens metering as such, really. So if I was to take the photograph, basically now it would allow it to just basically get the correct exposure, if it's possible, as far as it's got the right amount of flash power available and the subject isn't too far away. The next mode, if we press the mode button here, you can see is manual. Now, for many of you, you're going to start to learn manual probably in your second phase of Speedlight kind of teaching yourself and things really. Why? Because it's more kind of complicated in some ways, because the Speedlight is just going to fire the amount of power. We can tell it how much power by pressing the likes of the plus button, and then in this flash I can dial it to the clockwise direction to increase the power. When we get to 1-1, which is all the way up the other end, this is the maximum that this flash can fire, okay? Doesn't matter how far away the subject is to the flash, this is going to give it all its flash. If we want to then control the actual flash because it's too much, I can just turn it down in the anti-clockwise way to the likes of quarter power, to 8th power, 16th, and all the way down to the likes of the 128th power. On pretty much all Speedlights, they're going to move from the likes of 1-1, which that's full power, right the way down to 128th, which is going to be a blip of flash, okay? So that's the manual element, but remember there is going to be some exposure control. We're trying to decide on that, and most of the time we're going to be using the likes of a meter to actually meter how much flash is kind of being thrown out, so we can kind of get the exposure. We'll talk about those in further films, I promise you, all right? The other mode then, if we press the mode button again, you can see we've got into multi, and basically the multi means that it's a strobosonic, a bit like you would in a disco. That's showing my age, isn't it? Yeah. But kind of it's strobe in itself, and we can set the amount of flashes it's going to fire in a duration of time. So hertz is basically the amount of flashes. If I press the hertz button, that's the amount of flashes we're asking it to fire. And then basically, if we press the multi, this is where we actually tell it to how many in total we want it to actually fire through it. So we could have the likes of 10 and 5, or 5 and 10, and obviously we would have that amount of flashes that are going to fire in the duration that we're giving it. Obviously, when we're using strobe, we're going to need slower shutter speeds. We'll get to shutter speeds in a minute, okay? So we've talked about what a speedlight is. We've talked about the basic functionality on the back here. And now we need to actually talk about how it kind of can be adjusted in its own kind of quality and direction, okay? The more money you spend, as a rule of thumb, you're going to have more and more accessories with your Speedlight. And the simple accessory can be something that allows the head itself to change its direction, okay, from one side to another, even backwards behind us. Okay, let's talk about that. So as far as the flash itself is concerned, it's usually, when you first begin to use a flash, you're going to be using it direct in front of you, okay? But that's going to give us a very kind of sharp pinpoint of light in the subject's eyes. It's going to look like it has flash. It doesn't matter how much we control this, there's going to be that catch light within the eye is going to give us that big kind of dot. We want to actually change its direction. So the first thing would be is bounce flash, in fact. So if we just tilt it up, this allows the light now, instead of just going direct into the subject, it can actually bounce off the likes of a reflective surface up here like a card. It comes with what is referred to as a catch light card, okay? So let me just push that out first. So this is a catch light card. What that's going to do is, as you tilt it more and more, and it usually goes to a 90-degree position, okay, in relationship to the shape of the flash, and then at 45, and then actually down to the full kind of 90. So you get a kind of a good idea on what this is going to do. Now what this is now in this position, in the vertical, pretty much there's no flash going to go onto the subject in front of you. All it's going to receive is whatever is bounced off this little card here. That's all that's going to actually have it. So if I was taking somebody's portrait like this, yes, and I'm going to have the flash going towards them, you're going to find I'm quite tall, so it means that the shadow is going to go behind them. If I was shorter though, basically, and they were taller, because the flash is going upwards, we're going to have a shadow that goes up behind them. All right, so be careful of that. What this is allowing us to do is to change the softness and the direction to the flash. So this will just add that catch light still into the eye, but it's not going to make it as severe. So there is a zoom facility, as I said, within the flash itself. It's mainly in automatic. So if you see at the minute, it's on 14 mil. If I kind of just push the wide angle diffuser back in again, you can see it's gone back to 35 mil. And now it acknowledges I'm zooming the lens in and out, because that hot shoe communication is going on between camera and the speed light. So now I've zoomed to the 105. We can see on the top of the flash here, it's showing 105. As I slowly zoom out and I just fractionally touch the shutter release on the camera, you can see it acknowledges that I'm changing the actual wide angle element. Now, there's some very powerful things that we can do with a zoom. We can not only move it in automatic mode like we just saw, but if I was in a wide angle effect, but I wanted to almost give a kind of a stage light. So in other words, let's say I've got a bride and groom coming up the aisle, or I've got a little girl on some steps and I want to just bring a focus of light onto them, like they're spotlit. I could use the zoom facility on here, so still keep the camera lens on wide angle, but pressing on the zoom and then tell it to actually work in a different way. Okay, so we're going to cover that on another film where we can actually kind of change it from an automatic mode into a controlled mode. So we talked about the master and slave, or commander and slave. Okay, those are the common terms we're going to hear of. So when you're kind of using multiple flashes, we need to tell something to become the master. Yes, something's got to control other things. I know it's a horrible term, the terminology in today's society, but that's really what it's still called, or commander. Okay, this flash allows me to, just by pressing the left kind of lightning bolt here, is going to allow me to change how I want it to actually work. And if I cycle through the different ones, it's allowing me to go from master to slave and back to wireless off and so on. But if I just move it across into the master mode, at this stage, it is going to control other things. You see that the blue light, the link button, has now come up. So if I come over and I turn on another flash, and now I press the same button, and I turn this into a slave, you can see already that a link has now been communicated between the two of them. Okay, this has now turned from blue on the master, and now it means that this is communicating. Now this means that this flash will now tell the other flash to fire at basically the same time. Okay, so it means that one is going to tell the other one to fire, just to prove the point. If I turn it towards you, you'll see it work and things ready. Okay, now there's a great little thing that just happened. We had a lovely little noise that went, "Oi, I worked," which you want to hear all the time. And you also want to see the little green light that is either going to come off on the master commander, or it's going to be showing on the actual slave unit itself. Okay, so what I'm doing again, let's just look at this little green light here as I take the photograph. We can see the green light comes up, and that's what you want to see on pretty much all of your flash photography when you're working in TTL. That means it has gained the exposure it was trying to create. Now, one of the powerful things that we're going to cover when we get into wireless flash is all the setup to actually tell this one not to fire, or to tell this one to fire more, and when we're going to start to work in ratios and everything else with it. Right, that's kind of just got through some of the terminology. I'm going to switch this back off here. So we're going to switch this other flash off. We're back to one flash on camera. We're going to switch it back into the normal mode, so it's going to go to wireless off. Oh, scroll too fast. And just pressing OK. Now this is back in its TTL mode. Remember what we were doing before. So this is going to be an automatic exposure. As I zoom in the lens, it tells it automatically to zoom to where I am. It's automatic in the exposure, and as long as my aperture is allowing the amount of flash combined with the ISO together, then basically they're going to work and give us a perfect exposure. Okay. The next thing is going to be something that you've heard is the terminology of second curtain sync and high speed sync. Okay, so the different camera manufacturers have a default shutter speed that the Speedlights or flash is designed to work with. Somewhere between 160th of a second and 200 plus of a second. Canon's 200, Nikon might be something different and so on, but just read the kind of the manufacturer's setup of the camera and you'll find straight away what its default is. Now, just because it says it's 200th of a second doesn't mean you've got to shoot it on 200th of a second the whole time. The slower the shutter speed, the more of the ambient light we're going to be seeing. We'll talk about that in another film. The faster the shutter speed, less of the ambient light is going to be seen, plus we're going to freeze the subject even more, okay? So as you can see on screen, when we shoot with it in the camera manufacturer's mode, 1/60th, 200th of a second, the flash has enough time when it explodes to basically expose the whole of the CCD, so we know that the whole of the image. If I use too high a shutter speed, all right, it basically doesn't give the flash enough time to pass across the CCD, and what you're going to end up with is a shutter sync problem, and you're going to end up with a black line. The higher the shutter speed, the more the black line. You'll get to a point where you won't see any of the flash at all with it. Now, to overcome this, the Speedlight manufacturing kind of technology encourages you to kind of move into high sync mode. So the terminology high sync, if you think about it, it's high speed, all right? That's the easiest way. So once you go above the 200th of a second, straight away we want to be able to go across to our flash, and we want to be able to move into the different setups as we're going to see on here, all right? So with it on, in this case I press sync, you can see now, by pressing it, it's now highlighted that the lightning bolt with a H. It's the common denominator for high speed sync. What this allows me to do now is basically shoot in a higher shutter speed. If I don't do that, remember, I'm going to have a shutter sync problem. I'm going to get those black lines. If I press the sync again, though, you're going to see we've got 3 little arrows, and the right-hand arrow is black. What that designates is second curtain sync. Second curtain sync means that if we're using very, very slow shutter speeds, yes, 15th of a second, 8th of a second, 1 second, and so on, instead of the flash firing at the beginning of the exposure, it now fires at the end. So in other words, if I've got somebody spinning towards me, yeah, like a dancer, yeah, if I was in normal sync mode, even with slow shutter speeds, I can work in normal sync mode, okay? It would fire at the beginning, so she would be exposed for here, yeah? But as she comes towards me, it's darker, right? Now that means all the blur, if there's ambient light in the scene, we're gonna see it, okay? And obviously we don't really wanna see that as a rule. If we put the flash into second curtain sync, it says what it's going to do, okay? It means that it's going to fire at the end just before the curtain of the exposure kind of shuts down, okay? So that's the key thing that we're doing here between a normal flash mode, a high sync for higher speeds above 200th of a second, and then the likes of a second curtain sync to allow us to actually fire the flash at the end of the exposure instead of at the beginning. So let's kind of just bring this film to an end of the basics with it, because you're going to get it out of the box, okay? When it's out of the box, the first thing to do, just good habit, yes, is to make sure that you put the batteries in. That always helps, all right, guaranteed. And the next thing is going to be, is before you switch it on, if you're going to put it on the camera, I should say, have it switched off, all right? So have the camera off, have the Speedlight off, then put it onto the camera hot shoe. Use the little kind of grip In this case, it's just a little kind of push across. On some of the other models, have I got an older one? There we go. You've got almost like a thumb screw kind of attachment here and things really. So you can see the difference between the kind of just pushing across and the thumb screw element that is in here. Both allow a tightening and a grip. Remember, don't over tighten stuff, otherwise you're going to do some damage to something along the way. Once the flash is on, I'd recommend then that you switch your camera on first. Okay, and then pretty much at the same time you can switch the flash on and basically you're ready to go. You can take a photograph, and if it's in TTL mode, your aperture is likes of f5.6 or f4. They're within about 10 to 15 feet of you. You're working on an ISO of 100 to 400. You're basically going to get a good exposure straight away with it and things, all right? Remember that if you don't want the subject to have flat flash, yes, and to minimize the shadows behind them, instead of the direct flash mode, tilt it up, bring your catch light out, the catch light card out, with or without the wide angle diffuser, that's really down to yourself. And then you basically go in. If you want to actually change its quality even more, and you've got a white wall to one side, then you could actually just turn the actual flash to the side. It would then bounce off the kind of the wall to the side or whatever it would be. And obviously this works in exactly the same way. If I had the wall behind me here, I basically could just take it straight off the tripod. If I was taking the photograph, I can turn this to actually work in a reverse. So in other words, bounce off the white wall behind me to make it bigger. Let's finish with about quality of flash, okay? As far as the flash in its own design, you can see, because all it's trying to do is light the CCD of the camera, in other words, the camera plane, yeah? It's rectangle in shape. Studio strobe is round. So basically, we'll get a sunlight quality from a studio strobe, where we'll get a different quality of light from a speed light. All this is, though, remember, is gas that is exploding. If we put something on the front of it, or we bounce it off something, or we change its shape, we are creating a different quality of light. So just don't get into the habit of leaving the flash on the whole time and just using it without even thought. There is time to think about when to use flash, and there is time to not use flash. And probably the best creative idea for me to give to you is that when you think you don't need flash, use flash. And when you think you don't need flash, use flash. But when you think you do need to use flash, switch it off. Okay, so kind of always go for the more cautious of using the flash in a creative mode than just going into the habit of doing it. Look, I hope you've enjoyed this introduction. I know some weird technology and some weird kind of the terminology that goes in there, but at the basics, what we're trying to do is make the flash perform as we want it to. At some stage, you're going to say, I want more control, and you're going to move it off evaluative through the lens metering, and you're going to want to take more control, and you're going to start to use manual, but we'll cover that on another film. Hope you've enjoyed it. See you on the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.